Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots. It is I, a useless idiot. Today I want to talk about Eric Holder again. And I want to talk about Eric Holder and Jon Corzine again. But this time I want to talk about Eric Holder and Jon Corzine together, because now we have an answer as to why there have been no prosecutions and arrests for Wall Street crimes. We find out why there's been no arrests and prosecutions in foreclosure fraud, and we find why there's been no prosecutions and arrests of Jon Corzine, who is at the head of the collapse of MF Global. And so as it turns out, Jon Corzine's MF Global was a client of Eric Holder's law firm. And not only that, Eric Holder's Assistant Attorney General, Lanny Breuer, also worked for the same law firm, Covington and Burling. And not only that, but the MF Global bankruptcy itself was handled by a law firm called Morrison and Foerster. And there's the Associate Attorney General working under Eric Holder. Mr. Tony West came from that law firm. And as it turns out, the law firm represented some of the biggest banks on Wall Street, including Bank of America, Citigroup, J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, and the Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae mortgage houses. So, of course, Eric Holder is not going to prosecute any of the banks because they're his former clients and probably his friends. And Jon Corzine was one of his clients and probably one of his friends. And not only that, but the law firm of Covington and Burling also represented MERS, the Mortgage Electronic Registration System, which is at the heart of the foreclosure fraud program. So calling this a conflict of interest is child's play. And then it gets more interesting. The trustee overseeing the MF Global's bankruptcy is a former FBI director, Louis Freeh, who also worked with Holder and is good friends with Eric Holder and Jon Corzine. And it also turns out that Jon Corzine has something else in common with Eric Holder and all these top Justice Department officials. They're all present or former money bundlers for Obama. So Jon Corzine, of course, is not in prison now, so he can bundle millions and millions of dollars for Obama's re-election campaign, which is what he has been busy doing. And it's no accident either that in recent years, many of Holder's staff have returned to the law firm of Covington and Burling. In fact, on their website, they brag that they have 22 attorneys that used to work for the Justice Department and 12 attorneys that used to work for U.S. attorney offices across the country. So to call this a conflict of interest is, like I say, child's play. And I would suggest that this is the norm. This is something we've talked about all along in cronyism. This is about capitalist cronyism. This is about political favoritism. This is about the revolving door between corporations, law firms, and the United States government. This is about insiders. This is about class affinity, because all these people have one thing in common. They're up at the top, and they're wealthy, and the rest of us are below. So they have more in common with each other than they do with us, and that's what binds them all. And just so this idea isn't lost, let's talk about a couple more cases of conflict of interest, because there's plenty of them. So now we have this new revelation about the connection between Eric Holder, the Justice Department, Jon Corzine, MF Global. But then, of course, as we know, we have conflicts of interest when somebody like Jamie Dimon, the head of J.P. Morgan Chase, is also on the New York Federal Reserve Board, which oversees his bank. And we have Federal Reserve officers who, of course, served on the boards of all the Federal Reserve System in the United States, who made sure that their banks, the ones that represent their interests and they have investments in, got bailed out to the tune of $14 trillion during the economic collapse of 2007. And then, of course, who can forget the track record of Timothy Geithner, our present Treasury Secretary, who before that was head of the New York Federal Reserve, overseeing all the banks that he coddles now as a government official. And then, of course, he has a background with the IMF as well. So these guys all travel in the same circles, and they make all the same friends. So no surprise that we find ourselves with these kind of situations. But let's go to another couple stories that bear out this same nepotistic, insider, cronyist atmosphere that is our government and our corporate atmospheres. So it turns out that J.P. Morgan has been paying $190,000 a year to the spouse of that bank's top regulator. Yes, it's true. William Dudley, who is the head of the markets group as of 2000. So when the collapse happened, William Dudley was handling the market group for the Federal Reserve, and he's a former Goldman Sachs banker himself, and he was in charge of managing bank reserves, which would be a very convenient spot to be in the post-crisis world when demands have been made to raise the bank reserves of all the too-big-to-fail banks. And of course, the guy who oversees all the banks is not going to enforce that because he is William Dudley, who used to work for Goldman Sachs. And then in 2009, William Dudley became president and CEO of the New York Fed, which once again is the bank regulator that oversees J.P. Morgan Chase. And yet J.P. Morgan Chase pays Dudley's wife, Ann Darby, who incidentally is a former vice president of J.P. Morgan. She has $2 million in deferred income and 401k with J.P. Morgan. So she has a lot invested in J.P. Morgan and a lot invested in case they have any problems. So William Dudley, who works for the Federal Reserve, is going to make sure that nothing bad happens to his wife, a former VP of J.P. Morgan. So how good a job do you think the Federal Reserve of New York is going to do regulating over J.P. Morgan Chase when his wife is a former vice president of that bank and still receives $190,000 a year in cash? So, and oddly enough, too, Mr. Dudley himself, he's going to be with the Federal Reserve for 5 years, and he will have a retirement account of well over $1 million. So there's another good example of blatant cronyism and insiderism. And but let's take it one step further. Let's notch it down a little bit and tell a story about how it operates on a smaller level, a local level, because this behavior is learned on the ladder up to the top. So before you get to the Federal Reserve, before you get to J.P. Morgan, maybe, for example, you're just an officer for the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. In this case, we have a man who is working for the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, who once again is an agency that dropped the ball during the financial crisis and the foreclosure fraud, and have taken lots of criticism. So as it turns out, the National Bank Examiner in Jacksonville, Florida, for the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, has been golfing with bank employees, and the bank employees pick up the tab, and then he charges back to the taxpayer and the government safety and soundness activities or travel while he's on these golfing trips. So how much do you think he's going to regulate and oversee banks when he's out golfing with the employees? So another example of insiderism, nepotism, cronyism, and how cancer-ridden and decaying the entire system is. They're all in on it together. They're all friends. They have more in common within their class than they do with the fellow citizens of the United States. And that's very important to keep in mind. We are Americans down here at the bottom, the 99%, and they are Americans 1% at the top. But we live in two different countries and we have two different allegiances. Americans in the 99% still have allegiance to this country. That 1% has allegiance to their class. They don't care how many American citizens in the 99% get screwed over because they belong to their class, not to this country. I am a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.